Wasn't that a great film? Oh my gosh.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was extremely moving, extremely timely, and just a beautiful testament to someone who's profoundly important to our culture and to a lot of people personally, which you could tell from the way that people spoke about her in the film. And I think you captured their just feeling of respect and real deep respect for this woman. But first, I just want to say congratulations on your recent Peabody Award, which is an incredible achievement for this film and well-deserved. And it's on top of a Gracie. What other recognitions we have?
The Television
Academy.
Yes.
So we're dealing with an award-winning director and such a really important film that I'm glad that it's gotten this attention. And I want to kind of start there to say, you're getting the recognition, well-deserved finally after a long career as a filmmaker. How does it feel?
Well, it feels great. I'll start there. And it feels great because Rosa's story is so important, as you said, to our country and the world. And, people know her name, but not her full story. And that is what we wanted to bring forth. In terms of my own personal career, it's, each film is a different birth and a different baby, and I'm so happy to bring that me and my co-director and my team have brought forth this film, especially during this time, especially during this time when there are forces in this country trying to ban history.
That's right.
And history that makes people feel uncomfortable, and literally, this last couple of months they tried a publisher in Florida tried to put forth a lesson plan about Rosa Parks that omitted race from the story.
So how do you tell a story about Rosa Parks without the race part?
Yeah, it's
so
really
she just
crazy.
Wanted to sit down on the bus for what?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's that kind of stuff that's happening, which is really crazy. But it is happening in our country, and not just in Florida. So it feels so important that we have this film out now. And we also have a great education campaign for the film with the Zinn Education Project, who have been, putting forth Jean Theoharis's book, which the film is based on, licensing for the film.
Absolutely. Well, they made a Young Readers Edition.
Young Readers Edition for
They're
the film.
distributing that
That's
widely.
Right. Yep.
And I've seen they have several really interesting lesson plans
That's
that
right.
are created by, in collaboration with teachers and scholars, experts, activists.
Absolutely, yeah. And so,
but at the same time, the book is being taken off the shelves in libraries across the country, right?
Yeah. So it's never been more important for this film to be out here.
Absolutely. I want to talk more about that issue, but first let's back up and tell us a bit about how this project came to you.
I came to this project because of my co-director, Joanna Hamilton, who is a colleague and a documentary filmmaker, and she had connected with Jean Theoharis, the author of the book, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. And Jean, every year on Rosa Parks' birthday, Jean does a Twitter thread of all the things you should know about Rosa Parks, but don't. And Joanna was reading that thread and was like, oh my gosh, these are things that I should know about Rosa Parks, but I don't. And she connected with Jean, found out that there had been no feature documentary about Rosa Parks, and was shocked, because that just seems weird. And she contacted me and was like, hey, did you know that there was no feature film about Rosa Parks? I was like, really? And
it seems like somebody would have done that.
Yeah, it seems like somebody would have done it, exactly. Yeah. And I read the book, And I was also shocked about all that I didn't know about Rosa Parks. And we really felt that the time had come for her true story to be told, especially, in these last few years when we are starting to, talk about Black women in the movement, which had been something that had been, not examined or given the lens that it needed. And that really her time had come. And so we joined forces and we went to Soledad O'Brien's production company. They enthusiastically took up the call to get this film made, and we landed at Peacock, and that's how the film was birthed. And then we had to make the film, of course.
So if you want to see it again,
yes,
you can access it on Peacock.
That's right.
And yeah, that's an incredible team and production company. So that's really fortunate that you had that. I think that, it's really also important because so many films that are about women of color in politics are not well distributed, funded, or promoted.
Yeah.
Right? And so they don't get major names attached or, based on like a best-selling book that then gets to have all these iterations of dissemination. So it's well-deserved for Rosa Parks's legacy, and thank God for that. I think one thing that I'm really struck by is the way that you are intervening in this problem of history as being mistold, miscommunicated, obscured, buried, banned in this moment, and that we've been also living with these myths about not only the civil rights movement being something that Black people did somehow between 55 and 65, and then it ended, and then it became just Black Power, which was a totally different thing with a different cast of characters, right? So we don't get a sense historically about the Black freedom struggle that begins the moment of emancipation.
That's right.
Through Reconstruction and the nadir period of the late 19th century, early 20th century. How it was mobilized by World War I and World War II, because the Black veterans, which you're addressing here, is so important, that was a major kind of mobilizer of Black political consciousness and frustration with the status quo, with Black soldiers coming back and saying, I at least deserve respect, and to not be called boy. I thought that was a profound moment. So we have this kind of, you in this film showing us this is a long-term Black freedom struggle that has a lot more continuity than being broken up into something different, into these bite-sized things we call just the civil rights movement. And how we think about that history is also embedded in all these myths about Rosa Parks herself.
Exactly.
And I think that it's, the first one is really striking. I love at the end of the film where you have this Nancy Pelosi scene where they're revealing the statue. You can see this.
Exactly.
And like personally, I have feelings about that statue. I wonder how you feel about it too, but she reiterates the myth that you had just spent the whole film dispelling, which was that she was just tired one day, and that simple act of sitting down, So there's that, and then there's also this kind of issue of, the fact that she only did one thing that one time and didn't have 40, 50-year career after that.
That's right.
Plus before.
Right. Yeah.
So what that implied, and what you and many people are saying in the film, is that she was actually a tactician, a strategist. She was a trained activist. So could you talk more about, what it meant to you to dispel these myths and some of the ways in which you tried to make the film do that work?
Absolutely. I mean, that was really the point of the film, right? That the dispelling the myth that she did this one thing on this day and that was it. And that was the end, from beginning to end. I had heard of her work around Recy Taylor only a few years before coming onto this project. So to me, when I learned that she was working to, you know, expose crimes of black women in the South in the 1940s. I mean, really, when you think about that and the risk that she took, literally the physical, and she talks about that. You know, we have her in the film saying, I wouldn't even want to tell you what I went through, you know. It's just really, really intense. And that she was taking that risk then, and of course had her own experience with an attempted sexual assault, because that was something that black women experience very frequently, and that was not talked about. And that she, you know, worked on through the rest of her life. You know, we talk about the Joanne Little case that she was a part of in the 1970s. And the fact that after that she was run out of Detroit because of you know, threats to her life, but all the work
Montgomery.
Run out of Montgomery to Detroit, and all the work that she did in Detroit, literally to the end of her life, right? So that's the other part that you mentioned, that she never was satisfied. She never stopped fighting for freedom. And I think that's what, even at times of despair, you know, so during, right before the bus boycott, she was very disheartened with the slow pace of what was happening in Montgomery. She felt that the black people were too complacent in Montgomery, and that, you know, weren't pushing hard enough. And she was very, very, very disheartened, but she kept on going, you know. She says during the riots how, you know, that there may be no end to this problem, but she kept on going. And so I feel like that is something that we can learn from her, and maybe take some hope of, you know, and some inspiration to keep on going, despite what can feel like very dire times that we're living in right now.
I'm glad that you said that. I mean, it's a whole career's worth of activism that she kept going. And, you know, and that she was quite more radical than people thought, right? A lot of people thought because she was aligned with SNCC and LCLC, or really they were aligned with her. That's what I mean, she was there before they showed up.
Exactly, that's right.
And then King comes and takes all the credit.
Yes.
And I just was so stunned. They didn't even fund her. She was unemployed and suffering and really doing without, and nobody knew. It came to Jet Magazine to put an expose, so thank God for John Conyers and drawing attention to the important people that did, but that is shameful.
Oh, it's shameful.
It is really.
It's totally shameful.
The amount of money and attention and travel and accolades, and I think that there was this really important moment, you know, wanting to speak to this issue about one of the myths you're dispelling is that there's no major black women who were leaders and are important to the movement. That scene, the whole thing about the March on Washington was super interesting. I didn't know that story about Lena Horne trying to take over the mic, and who else was it who was also trying to get attention to her?
Daisy Bates was on. She was the only woman who spoke for just a little bit of time. And Lena got up and said, freedom, you know, and that was it.
Like nobody wanted to hear it.
And Rosa Parks did not speak. She spoke at the, there was I think it was before the march officially started, a little thing for women, but it wasn't the official march. And, you know, the fact that no women spoke at the March on Washington, when so many women had been
Fannie Lou Hamer.
Yes,
I mean, like
you could go on and on.
Even
you
Coretta.
know. Yeah,
and
exactly. I mean, just goes to show you the patriarchy that and the sexism that was part of the the movement. And it was a reality.
Did you get a glimpse at all from her papers, how she felt about that? She seemed so kind of just authentically
Yeah.
humble. I think she should be sainted. Like, I think
Yeah.
she's just one of those saintly people that she would never think a bad thought or have, they said,
Well, she did
expectations, but
say,
it might
she
have
did
pissed her
say,
off a
yeah, she
little.
said, we weren't given, she said in her quiet strength way,
Right.
she said, well, women weren't really allowed to speak at the march. Like, she knew what time it was,
That's right.
But also, too, as you said, this was, her personality, and we have, people who say in the film, like, her strength was in her quietness. She wasn't out there, boastful or looking for accolades. That wasn't her personality. And I also think, too, it was probably also a woman of her time, where women weren't supposed to do that.
That's right.
And I think that was also part of why she didn't get the credit that she deserved.
Not only was she more radical than everybody thought, because I didn't actually even know the extent to which she supported the New Africa movement and the Black Madonna Church and Malcolm X.
That's right.
And I think she, like, looking at this now, she's really politically was much more aligned to Malcolm. And particularly around the issue of self-defense. I think that was something that was really Martin's project, that from his religious studies and his PhD in divinity degrees, that he was studying Gandhi and he was studying these kind of examples in the decolonizing world of this tactical use of nonviolence and the moral campaign.
That's right.
Of how to kind of use nonviolence to manipulate the kind of moral consensus in the country really astutely. But, she was a lot more practical, having grown up the way she did.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? And also how Scottsboro plays a role in radicalizing her beliefs?
Absolutely, yeah. So we start the film, as you saw, with her on her grandfather's porch as he is warding off the KKK with a shotgun.
That's right.
And she says, I wanted him to see him shoot the Kluxer, the Ku Kluxer. This wasn't unique to Rosa Parks. As we were talking about, the strategy of self-defense was not a strategy. It was a way of survival for Black people in this country since the time we got here, since the time we were brought here. So the fact that we don't talk about self-defense is really where self-defense has always been part of our survival in this country.
Yeah.
Our movement gets reduced to, and not, I don't say reduced in a condescending way, but it does get minimized to a king nonviolent strategy.
That's right.
And that's never been our only, way of moving forward and fighting for our freedom. And Rosa Parks' story embodies that, because she was an admirer of Malcolm and also obviously an admirer of Dr. King. So these separate silos that get pitted against each other.
Yes, because they're always pitted.
They're always
Malcolm
pitted,
and
and
Martin
that's
against
right.
each
Or
other.
Black Power,
Yes.
and
The more respectable.
the more respect. Yes, but
clergy.
that's not how how Black people, for the most part, went about fighting for freedom. It was using, and Rosa Parks epitomizes that, using the different parts that worked.
That's right.
At different times.
And it also seems to be kind of space or regional specific, and this kind of, I think it's interesting that we see her in the South doing this particular kind of work,
Yes.
and then in the North, where conditions are similar, very similar in terms of segregation and lack of opportunity and all these things, but in
Police
a different
violence.
context completely.
Yep.
And Malcolm from Michigan
That's
and
right.
New York, comes to Detroit, and he makes sense for that context in a way that he wouldn't have for Montgomery.
Yeah, I had heard about that. My mom used to tell me about that. As a Northerner, how Malcolm made sense, as you just said, for New Yorkers. She was a New Yorker, and that's where they were aligned.
Right.
So yes, I think it was, and her having both of those, the Montgomery and the Detroit experience.
The issue of self-defense is super interesting and understudied we get those kind of tropes of the Black Panthers as if they were the first ones
Yeah.
to hold guns in defense of themselves. And we know that gets kind of, that approach faces major sabotage from COINTELPRO, the FBI, and the subversion of those groups and declaring them kind of radical and terrorists. And I think the narrative that we're left with today is really one that evacuates the reason why they felt that they needed to defend themselves.
Absolutely.
Which was white supremacist violence in the
Yeah.
first place. And I just want to connect that back to something you said earlier about Recy Taylor and Joan Little. I think it's really powerful that we get that perspective, because the other thing that's not talked about is all the work that people, particularly women in the movement, were doing to address sexual violence
Yeah.
as, indivisible with the rest of the violence of white supremacists.
That's right.
Terrorism.
Well, as we know, Black women historically were not seen to be able to be violated, right? That was the stereotype, the trope that was set up.
Yeah,
right?
we were unrapeable.
Unrapeable, right? And of course, that has to do with the whole history of
Yeah.
slavery and rape and all that. It's a whole nother.
right.
So the fact that she and other women were working to expose this and say, Black women have historically been violated and raped and abused by men, by white men in particular, was something, as we said, that was not, that wasn't done. So to do that in the 20s and 30s and 40s was really an act of bravery and risk, like risk to your life.
And at the same time, they acutely understand the myth of the Black male rapists as also part of the story.
That's right.
This other kind of the kind of gendering of Black men as being, these super dangerous predators, that was used against the child Emmett Till and the Scottsboro Boys, who were also
right.
children,
Yep.
and that there was no hesitation to actually kill children based on this false myth.
That's
and so like the myths that were attached to Black women, I wondered if you've found that she was frustrated at all that she didn't have as much support as she should have at that issue.
We didn't see in her writings, and which we used, we decided we wanted this film told in her words as much as possible. So we were able to access her writing, which are at the Library of Congress.
Yes.
And, we had Lisa Gay Hamilton, the actress, read, and we showed her letters and, really figured out how to tell the story in her own voice. And we didn't see her talk about frustration about not having the support. Again, I think it's important for us to understand the time period that we're in, right? Like, maybe there was no expectation that she would have that support. Like, I have to go out and do this, and I'm taking the risk, and that's it.
Because those cases were extremely dangerous cases that, even the charges didn't stick, and
nothing ever happened to the perpetrators.
There was no resolution. It reminds me, recently with finally the accuser of Emmett Till passing away, who never was held accountable for her lies either. But that's what we're left with. But speaking of, this film used I love the cool techniques that you use visually, but especially the archival aspects and how you had, were those actually like visuals of her diary that you were able to get, where the words were popping off the page that Lisa Gay Hamilton's reading?
Yeah. So they were images from her writing. So we really tried to figure out, right, when you're making I've done a few historical films at this point, how you make it, engaging, obviously, contemporary, interesting visually? How do you like bring the archive alive, really, is the question. And that was one of the techniques that we wanted to use. So you see her writing her words. Also with like the photos, right? With the bringing the photos alive in this kind of 3D graphic treatment, can bring, makes it feel alive. And so that's what we, our team really wanted to do. How does her life and her work resonate today? And visually, how do you feel that?
That's so interesting. Yeah, and so how did you come across such rich materials? I was really loved, like there's so much footage I had never seen before, including the first scene with the game show. That was really interesting. With the real Rosa Parks, please stand up.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I have
so
to say, as I'm sure you know, making a documentary is a team sport. So one of the first things that we did was hire an archival producer. When you're making archival film, that's where you have to start. Like, what is the archive that's out there, and what do we have access to? So we actually ended up having a bunch of archival producers. And we also made this film during COVID, like during the heat of COVID. So there were some archive houses that were not, open or were not open. The Library of Congress was, when we first started, they were not, their hours were limited. So it was definitely a challenge. Definitely a challenge.
To make this during COVID on top of it, my lord.
Yeah, exactly.
Even more flowers for that.
Even more, and definitely, So that's feels crazy now to think about that. But so accessing that archival footage, but it's such a huge part of the process, and a whole team is we're looking for archive and trying to figure out if we can afford it, because that's a whole nother aspect. From the beginning to the end, it's
Well, I'm really glad they found that amazing rare material, and it was quite interesting. I'm glad that in that first scene with the game show, I was like, oh God, I was getting nervous. Like they don't recognize her, and then the man that did what's his name?
Nipsey Russell.
He a longtime comedian, entertainer back in the day. And he's like, of course I know Miss Parks, like you
Absolutely.
need to as well.
Yeah.
But this speaks to something in our culture that like literally most people would not be able to point out.
That's right.
Real historical people, important figures in front of them.
Exactly, yes.
And it's only going to get worse with banning all the books.
Oh my gosh, totally.
Just kind of increase ignorance.
Yes.
Speaking of the visual approach to the archive, and also making us hear the archive by having an actress, really talented actress, to read from her materials. I'm interested in your experience as a Black documentarian, telling Black stories, being a storyteller through documentary. You've done several historical films on The Green Book, on Black women entertainers, right? On Harry Belafonte, rest in peace. Some really, really important work, Yoruba, and I think that I just want to speak to the genre of documentary and your approach to storytelling of this story, of our history.
Yeah. I think, I didn't intend to do a lot of historical films. That wasn't when I started. That's not, was my goal. Of course, I've always been a lover of history, and when I find something out, so some of these films have come to me, like people have approached me to direct. Some I've generated from my own inspiration. But when I come across something that I didn't know, that especially when I think I should have known it, I'm immediately intrigued, because I feel like if I didn't know it, then maybe other people didn't know it, and maybe there is something new to tell about it, right? In a way that's revealing, or in a way that hasn't been told before. So that's where I start. And it's the approach is really, it's not scientific, it's really like a feeling, right? So if I'm reading a book or an article or hearing about something and I'm like, oh wow, this could be a film. And it's like guttural. It's you know,
and you start to see it visually.
and you start to see it visually, yeah. And you start to see like what it could be and what your thesis could be, like what your premise is, you know. And then then you go through the work of trying to figure out, who could I interview? Do I have access to them? How can I raise the money for this? Where would this, who would this, what audiences would this appeal to? All those questions, yeah.
What's your favorite part of the process?
Coming to places like this and screening and having conversations when
nice.
all the work is done.
And we had a nice dinner.
And you had a nice dinner before. Yes, absolutely. No, I mean, I really do love all parts of the process. And that's actually when I first, made my first video. It was because realizing that I loved all the parts of the process, loved the interviewing, the research about the topic, being in the edit room and trying to figure out how to tell the story, what music am I going to use. So I don't know if there's a favorite part. I guess, one of the most unfavorite parts can be trying to raise the funds, and that can be very, that can just be challenging just because of the nature of the film business. But yeah, I don't know if there's a favorite. I really do like all parts of it, and I emphasize, like, for me, the team. One of the favorite parts is like when you're working with great people and everyone's putting their heads together to try to figure out how to tell this story, and that synergy. That's really one of my favorite parts. And that can come, from the development part. It can come in the production part when you're trying to figure out the story. So, yeah.
So it is really a team effort.
It is a team effort.
And I was wondering about, and this relates to the funding as well, but, do you feel that other people share your sense of urgency in getting these stories out there? Is there more support than 10 years ago or so like that for a film like this to be possible? Because it feels like it's not just minoritized people who are at the brunt of the kind of politics that are happening, but everyone's really upset about it across the board. I think it's gotten to a place that just reasonable people feel like something's going wrong, and we need to kind of, address history in a more fair way, and and that we're entitled to tell our stories and to reveal that history, like the 1619 Project started a lot of the controversy around critical race theory, what's happening in Florida right now, and I think the intersection of the kind of don't say gay bill and anti-trans youth, anti-drag queen, anti-reproductive justice, and anti-Black history are all connected in a way, right?
Absolutely.
Seems like we're in a really complicated moment. And I wonder how you read that urgency in shaping your work, and if you feel like things have been changing because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll even go back a little. In some ways, we're kind of always at this moment, right? Like, we know the history of this country, we know the history, right? Of course, now all these things, as you just outlined,
it
are
always
happening.
feels like an emergency.
Yeah, exactly.
Mike Brown, George Floyd,
all,
whatever.
So, and that's historically, what our reality is in this country. Yeah. But also, too, just to add that. The media landscape, right? So I started in this business in the late 90s, early 2000s. I actually was over in the news side for a while too. And I was there when the news started, condensing and becoming more about a business as opposed to news. And with that, I feel like I saw how documentary started to grow and really became a place where people started to get information. I'll never forget in like 2007 or 6 or whenever that was, with Michael Moore's film, Fahrenheit 9/11, and being at a movie theater, and this was, we were in the war, and I remember seeing this huge long line for Fahrenheit 9/11 at a movie theater, and I was like, wow, like, things are, like, this feels different, right?
It did.
And then, of course, we had streaming and the growth of, what they call the golden age of doc, when all these people were looking for content. So there was a technological thing that happened, a contraction of the news that happened, and people, and I teach as well. I created the documentary film program at the City University of New York.
Fantastic.
And they, and when I started teaching is when young people started seeking out documentaries. They were like, this is what I watch, so all these things started happening. And, now we're in another, sort of interesting moment about economically and blah, 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 and we'll see where things sort of, pan out. But I do think documentary has become a place where people go to seek information and clarity about things and issues and people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
We really appreciate you guys staying this evening for the conversation and coming out for the film. And I'm just so pleased and grateful for you coming so far and being with us. Your work is brilliant. You're absolutely incredible. And you have friends at UCSB.
Yes.
For good. So come back and see us anytime.
Love to.
We're happy to screen for you. And everyone, please give Yoruba Richen a warm round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so much.